Ron. It's always so good to see everyone. Welcome. Um, I think we all have been here throughout the few sessions that we have. And we've all been enjoying this book and these stories so much. So I know that we have some great questions. This is such a great group that asks such important and generous and profound questions. So Ivelisse, I really think you're going to enjoy this tonight. There's really no rules. You don't necessarily have to raise your hand. Just when someone else is done talking and the question is finished, just go ahead and jump in. I just ask that you try to keep it, to the question, try not to go off on too much of a tangent tonight so we can listen to everyone's questions and get some good answers. So I'll start off and then I'll mute my mic and then y'all can kind of just jump in. Is that cool? I know I've seen that you, Ivelisse, you've been publishing your short stories for quite some time now. You've been published in many magazines and different literary platforms. So with this collection, Love War Stories, I'm just wondering if you can kind of start us off by speaking about what your intentions were when starting this particular group of stories.
Sure. One, I tend to go off on tangents, so you can wave at me if I babble too much.
No, you can go off on a tangent.
Oh, okay.
That's okay. Everybody else stick to the script.
For me, the book was always the stories were always a collection because I really started working on them when I was doing my MFA thesis and then my PhD dissertation. So those were the stories I was working on, and the goal, the collection is I wanted to talk about how love is detrimental to women, and so I wanted to show that, and I wanted to show the ways that sort of abuse happens, that it's not always physical, or it doesn't always start physically, but it also starts with like somebody transgressing your boundaries, etc. And what's important to me is the way girls are raised, and so we're raised to really sort of worship at the altar of love, and I would hope that one day we don't have that, because I think that love becomes this overriding thing. It becomes the thing that becomes most important, like, oh, he's abusive, but I love him. And, really the answer is so. And so, so love sort of seems to supplant like any sense of like self-preservation. It seems to supplant notions of kindness, consideration, compassion, etc. And so, if we could sort of take love off its pedestal, then I think we might have better relationships, because I think then heterosexual women would, wouldn't be so fixed on that particular idea. And so that's really what the book is about, in the larger sense. I also wanted to talk about the enclave of Puerto Ricans in Western Massachusetts. And so I've read a lot of Puerto Rican literature from the continental US, and I've never seen a fiction book about Holyoke or any of the other enclaves. I've never seen a book by a Puerto Rican about Puerto Ricans in Cleveland, Puerto Ricans in Chicago, Puerto Ricans in Orlando. All the books that I've read, and I've read many, by Puerto Ricans in the continental US have taken place in New York. And so I just really wanted to give space to those other enclaves to say, we're here too. So those were my main ambitions.
Very, very nice. Yeah, we talked about that. I think that was one of the first things that we actually talked about in this book club, was how we were actually reading a book about Puerto Ricans who weren't in New York, more specifically in the Bronx or somewhere uptown. So Does anyone want to ask a question? If not, no worries. I was actually wondering, and you feel free to say no, but if you have any inclination or energy to maybe read us a portion of the book, your favorite, your choice?
Yeah, sure. And luckily I prepared and brought my book. I was like, let me dig up the book. um, yeah. So I'm just gonna read one section from the Belindas, which is my favorite story. I worked the hardest on it.
It shows.
Okay, so I'm going to read from page 110. Okay. My heart is on my face. David comes back in the room, but I look at the pictures on my wall. They depict my life. There's no photo of this, though. The sting of the slap still splatters across my face. I keep my hand on my cheek to localize the pain. All the rage displayed in his face, in his hands, gone. He is slumped, empty, depleted of all anger, just like that. Like a faucet turned off and on by careless hands. He kneels in front of me and nuzzles his head toward my stomach. There's no sound in the room because I stopped crying as he moved toward me. His hands touch me, not the same hands of a few minutes ago or even a few hours ago. Belinda, he says, I used to love when he touched me with those hands, but now they sting and make me someone else. Belinda, sweetie, I love you. I'm so sorry. His words catch in his throat. Belinda has melted down between our fingers. I love you, he keeps saying. Even though my face is covered, my protective hand on my cheek, the pain runs through me. This pain and my body meet and bend me at their will. A silent reel begins to play in my head. There is a girl, smashed, imploding. There is stop, start. There is before, there is after. Soon his head on my stomach turns into his mouth kissing my belly, his lips crawling upward until he gets up from his kneeling position in front of me, and I have to move so he can lie next to me. I used to love his hands. They're stubby, almost incomplete, masculine, chalky, dry hands, but how they held me firm. His kisses, his touch, now surface level, but how they seal my shame. Open your eyes, he says. I love you, I really do. Do you love me? I don't want to answer, but he keeps asking, so I nod my head. Say it, he says. I turn my face to the wall. This is my hour of grieving, but there is no privacy. I am watching this happen. Two bodies on this bed. I am this girl. Her cries pick up again and are a whisper. Her eyes are closed. She wants to be alone. He lies back down, his hands neatly folded on his stomach, gentle, almost asleep. Before he turns to his side and puts his hand on her leg, kisses her back. Soon his hands are fondling her breasts. His insistence grows. He turns her face to his, doggedly kissing her lips. He stops kissing her, sits up and says, you can hit me. Here, hit me right here. I ponder the offer. would we be on equal footing again? In number theory, there are perfect numbers. A 6 divided by 1, 2, 3 can also be a 6 added from 1, 2, 3. What divides can also add back to the original whole. I watched my movie instead, and I hit rewind. Untrueness wins out. Let us enter a new world. A world where what just has happened does not exist. I don't know him. Sorry, my hand slithers toward him. I am no longer this girl. I don't know him. I don't know me. I slide my hand over the cracked shell of his face. It all disappears, falls apart under my touch. My lips part slightly as his inevitably inch toward mine. And I kiss him, like that night he took me to Ollie's and asked me to be his girlfriend. He seems relieved, like I have forgiven him. He's more shattered than I thought. A man made of pieces that don't connect. He tries to get on top of me, but I push him away. I get on top of him. As I clap my thighs around him, I try to hold us together.
Beautiful. You read that. Ironically, that's actually, we were reading 2 stories tonight, and that was one of them. So.
Oh, no, I saw, yeah.
Oh, you saw. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Wasn't that beautiful, though? I'm really glad you read that particular part. Does anyone want to chime in?
I did have a quick question. When you said right before you read it, that this was the story you worked hardest on, what does that entail? Because all the stories are so beautiful and so well written, but also so readable. And I just wanted to know what does that entail for Belinda?
Well, a lot of people really like the Summer of Nana story, but it actually came out in like 2 sittings, which is like a miracle and will never happen again. So I'm always like, so I begrudge that story because I'm like, but I worked really hard on the other ones. So for Belinda's, it was, I think at one point it was 40 pages, the story. It is like a 30-page story now. We got it down to like 30 pages. But dealing with like emotional content, like I really had to work the language so that it wasn't melodramatic and so that the emotions could still be felt like an authentic way. So it was really sort of like parsing of the language and being very careful with it, and you know, ultimately figuring out where Belinda ends up. I had this story workshop at Christina Garcia, and she was like, they have to have a confrontation. And so I had a little confrontation there, but then it just, I don't know, it wasn't working for me. And well, I really liked the way the ending came out. Like, it was a surprise to me. So I was like, okay. So yeah, so it was a lot of work.
When you say the ending was a surprise to you, how could that be if you wrote it?
Well, well, I didn't know that we were going to get to the point where she realizes that she's been the one that's been changing all along by gaining weight. And so, you know, when it came out, like, it was such a lovely reversal of the way the weight had been seen, and also obviously a reversal of like her jealousy, that she had really nothing to be jealous about. So, you know, it just wasn't like an ending I planned. I had her, definitely the ending I had planned was that, you know, she was going to see them one last time and then she was going to move on with her life, but I didn't have that reversal there.
Thank you.
Yeah, stories like become their own things, right? And they get to evolve and grow, and they're not this like sectioned off kind of perfect cookie cutter puzzle, right? They
Right.
grow like babies, like kids, you know, they're gonna grow into what they are supposed to be, if you will. So I really
Yeah,
appreciate
I'm sorry. It's, you know, one of the best pieces of writing advice I got was from Juno Diaz, and he said, I was in a workshop with him, and I forgot what story we were workshopping, but he said, you know, you as a writer have a story for your character, but the character has a story for herself. And so whenever I get stuck, I think about, well, what's the character, what's the story that the character would have for herself? And so, you know, so with that reversal and that surprise, you know, I think that's what Belinda wanted. You know, that's you know, that's her story there.
I have a question. I
Mhm.
know a lot of writers write based on personal experience, life experience, family experience. Are any of your stories based on your personal life or the lives of other people in the stories?
Yes, but not in totality. What I found was the story that I think is the most true to life is The Light in the Sky. But the problem was the truth kept getting in the way. And so I had to, like, you know, my allegiance had to be to the story and not the truth. So I'll like start with a kernel of something that's true, but by the time the story's done, it's completely like evolves. So for example, the story El que dirán, the story started because I heard my uncle laughing about my great aunt Nelva, and he said, "Oh, she's still waiting." And so I asked my mother, you know, what's she waiting for? And so the story was that her husband had left her to go to the United States, but he had left with his mistress. And so I guess she was still waiting for him. And but even when they were in Puerto Rico, he would go to her house after work, Nelva's house, and he would like eat. I guess she was a great cook. He would eat there, take a shower, and then go spend time with his mistress. So from that, that's where I got the idea for El que dirán. But you see, at the end, the only kernel that's really there is, well, the idea of a woman waiting and the husband leaving, but it doesn't wholly connect to the truth of the matter.
Go ahead, Yasmin. You're muted. Yasmin, you're muted.
Hey, how are you? So the first thing I noticed when you came on was like, oh, you have the Chronicles behind you. And I'm like, that's the book, the Feminist Chronicles right behind you. So I got to hear Brittany Cooper speak. So I was just like, oh, snap. Anyway, I've been reading it and I'm happy to read. I didn't have the book last week for the group, so I was just in here expressing myself. But however, I really love your style. It's so fantastic. Like, you know, each short story just feels like just the writing style is so diverse. Like you know, you would think it was like a completely different writer per se, but I was blown away by, like, since folks were just discussing the two Belindas, there was like lines that I wrote down that just blew me away. And it just brings me to a question I have, like, those initial bites remind me so much of love. Like the way you described eating pizza, I was like, that's exactly what it does feel like when you're hungry and you have a slice of pizza. I was like, how did she capture that? I was like, damn, that's true. And then also, like, oh my God, like, he loves so carelessly. Like, I've definitely met some folks like that. But what I really wanted to, and the puzzle pieces on the floor, that was fantastic. So you have so many vivid lines that are throughout the pieces, I was wondering, have you ever, or I don't know, because this is my introduction to your work, but I don't know whether or not you've ever worked with like haikus before, or if you have ever thought about that, because the way that you captured so much in those lines, right? It just makes me think, like, if you haven't did that already, or if that's not your background, you would be amazing in it, you know? So that was something I just wanted to bring to the top. And also, I wondered, yeah, I'll stop there. I'll stop right there.
You know, I really don't like poetry. And I know but I do like poetic elements in fiction. Like poetry, like I'm just like, it rattles my brain and I'm like, I need sentences. And like when I read fiction, it's like effortless for me. It's like I have I have a library in my head and I'm like connecting what I'm reading to all the other books that I know. But for poetry, I'm like, you know, sweating over each line. But I do like a lyrical style of fiction. That's something that's really important to me, is language. You know, I love Toni Morrison, and I love Women Hollering Creek by Sandra Cisneros. And I do love her poetry, but I think her poetry is like more accessible. And but I tend to not like fiction that doesn't do something with language. When I read, I want to be dazzled by those images, and I want to be like wowed by how this person put these words together. So I just edited a story for like the Boston Review, and the author wrote, like, we sent our voices out and then they came back to us. And I was like, I was like, that is so dope. I was like, I've never heard that, the way she expressed it. And so I want like delightful language. Having a PhD in English is kind of a problem, because I couldn't read fiction for a year and a half afterwards, because I'd be like, oh, well, I know where that's going, blah, blah. So I'm like a buzzkill, like in my head. And so, you know, so I mean, I really love beautiful language, and I want to be delighted and surprised when I read. And so that's important to me.
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing.
Miss Paula, were you going to chime in?
Well, yeah, thank you. I just want to say that I sort of think your dialogues are a little like poetry. I mean, the way when you said you were sort of describing the way you try to cut out the melodrama and make the language, the voices talk to each other and really say things, really says, that seemed to me like, I love that about your writing. And that really seems really poetic, and a kind of just paring down so the language is actually doing things between people. I just think it's beautiful, and I'm really honored to be, this is also my first time reading you, and I'm just grateful to the access. But the thing I want to go back to something else you said earlier, which is that the Summer of Nini was easy to write. And we were all sort of struck, because so far, at least in my reading, and I haven't caught up with this week, that's the only one where there's not a female narrator. And so I was just wondering if you could tell us more about that.
Yeah, you know, like something I forgot about, like when I was writing it, there was a story in Zoetrope that I had been reading, and it was also about boys that were like in love. The Zoetrope, the story in Zoetrope, it was a little, I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't fully like realistic, but I was so moved by that story. And basically, I mean, what happened is just one day I sat down just to free write, and like half of the story came out. And then I had to then write something for my fiction workshop. And I was like, oh, well, this looks pretty good. And then just the other half came out. So I don't know how that happened. But I stopped resenting the story, because as my friend used to call it, she's like, well, that's your moneymaker, in the sense like it's a story that can pull people in. So actually, when I got the book published, or when I got the book accepted for submission, what I did is I put that story first, because I was like, maybe they'll keep reading it. So this is my moneymaker story, and well, it worked. So yeah.
You know, with that story, what we talked about a little bit in the book club last week was, and it's so funny to hear you talk about it now because our conversation last week was almost completely different. You know, we talked about that idea of an author making the conscious decision to write in a voice that is not inherently their own, right? Female writing male, straight female writing gay male. And we talked at length, if I remember, about the intentions behind that, you know? So it's interesting to hear you say that. You're like, that just kind of came out of me. I wasn't too researched enough up. But you know what? I think we all kind of agreed. I think we all agreed actually that it was done so well. It wasn't stereotypical. There wasn't language being used that would not have been used outside of a teenager's vocabulary. You know, it wasn't forced at all. So really interesting to hear you talk about it.
I mean, it's a miracle. Like, it may never happen again. You know, people talk about the muse, and like, the muse rarely ever visits. You really, if you're gonna write, you just have to sit down and slog through it, and slog through all the ugly prose you're gonna come up with first. And so that was just kind of like a gift from the heavens. That's, you know, and, you know, I've been thinking about that, especially like in today's climate, that, you know, I think I would think twice about that story now, just because there's so much discussion about that. But you know, I think that would be unfortunate. I think that really people should be able to write what they want. And I mean, but they should also be ready to, you know, face the music if they, you know, do some like messed up things. But I mean, I think that's the beauty of fiction. I mean, also, he's a gay male, so I think it was sort of easier to break like heterosexual masculines like stereotypes in terms of like thinking about well, now because he's still performing heterosexual masculinity. I mean, I think the thing about being a writer is that with the other stories, you know, I sit with the characters. I close my eyes and I, you know, go through what they're going through. I'm going through their day. I'm thinking about how they're feeling, etc. And yeah, I mean, that's how the characters come to life. But I guess I didn't really do that here. I guess I just have a boy inside of me. So.
Does anyone else want to chime in?
When you're I'm sorry, go ahead, Anais.
Thank you. My favorite story so far is El que dirán, and we talked a lot about that in the first week because it is the first story in the book. And when you were saying that earlier, I was thinking, oh, I'm so glad she changed it and put El que dirán first, because for me, it had such a powerful, like all the elements of your writing is in that first story. And I remember saying, like, I didn't think it was an accident that you put the poem by Julia de Burgos at the beginning of that story, which is the beginning of the book. And I wanted to ask you to speak more about Julia de Burgos in your life. You've mentioned her in a few of the poems, and it seems like it might be biographical. You talk about your father was, and I don't know if that's really the case, about your father being, like, enamored of her poetry, but also we talked about, like, at least for me, I was an independentista, very, in the 70s and 80s, and very full-time activista. And so Julia de Burgos was very powerful, and she was such a feminist for her time, in the 30s, and she was the head of the women's section of the Nationalist Party. I mean, she's just so, like, wow. And so we talked a lot about, like, her life and the kind of like the pain of the alcoholism and of her, dying in the street. And I just, for me, it has a very, kind of powerful meaning that her character is in the book through her poetry. And I thought I experienced I would say, to me, I'm just going to say it, like, more than the book is about love, to me, the book is about women's degradation and women kind of being organized to believe in this myth of love. Also thinking about, we read Bell Hooks' All About Love in this book club, and how she's saying that's not love. Like, this is what love is, compassion, respect, a whole list of things. And that stuff that goes on in the book, which is really women's degradation, is not love. And so I'm just saying all the things that had come to me in the reading of this book that I found so powerful and so impactful. And so maybe I'll just say, maybe you could speak to that, like, why Julia de Burgos, and what you think about those notions of who she represented. To me, she was a revolutionary. And in that first book, in that first short story, I thought that Tia Lola, I think that was her name, Tia Lola, she did something revolutionary when she did not go with the one who had been picked for her, even though it was very tragic for her, that at that young age, she made a very, what I would call, revolutionary move to choose for herself, even though it didn't work out and it was very painful. And in that period, because it looks like it's probably around the 50s when that character exists in the story, and that would be even harder for a young woman in that, culture that was so organized around those rituals of the quinceañera and the betrothed. And so anyway, if you could maybe talk to that.
Yeah. But first, have you seen Residente's new video, This Is Not America? Okay, you gotta watch it. First of all, it's phenomenal. But it starts off with, like, Residente, he's a reggaeton singer. But it starts off with like Lolita Lebron shooting in the air. I think you would love it. Okay, really watch it. Okay, so first I'll talk about why El Young was first. It was always first before I, like, moved the Summer of Nana there just to try to get the book published. And it was first because we started in Puerto Rico. And so I wanted to show, like, a diasporic shift. So we started in Puerto Rico, then we go to Holyoke, and then, we can go to New York, but then we come back to Massachusetts, etc. So Julia de Burgos for me also is, the first poem I read was to Julia de Burgos. And so when you read it, you are struck by it, by how feminist it is, especially for the time period. I think it was maybe 2 years ago, I taught a class for the New York Society Library. I focused on Puerto Rican literature, and then we read the Jack Agüeros's, like, complete volume I think it's called The Song of the Simple Truth, the complete volume of her work. And there were actually a lot of love poems in there. And I was kind of like, so my favorite poems were the ones that were like super feminist and that were rejecting these norms. And it's definitely like a call. I think, you know, the poem at the beginning of El Queridang, I mean, I think it tells you, you know, what the book is about. And it's about like subverting those norms. And even in the story El Queridang, for me, it's a story about culture, right? It's an idea of how culture betrays you. So for Noelia, everybody, you know, turns their back on her. It's actually deleted here. It's no longer in the story, but the way it ended before was that now she was the woman that the men laugh at in front of the bar, blah, blah. And so I wanted to talk about that cultural betrayer because that also comes out when nobody says anything at the quinceañera, nobody, you know, supports her or anything like that. But culture is trying to form these particular women, but it's not necessarily for their own good. And so, you know, Tia Lola, she also stops that sort of cultural moment too in terms of becoming a woman. When she stops the quinceañera, Noelia is not going to be able to become a woman in a traditional Puerto Rican sense. Instead, to my mind, she makes like an American way of becoming a woman, which was by having sex and losing her virginity. And so that's why Arecibo, you know, doesn't know what she's going to bring when, you know, he's watching her come in from the shore. And so, yeah, so I definitely do agree that it's about degradation. And right, all those false forms of love and the way that they show up. And a lot of it is the way that culture constricts us. And also, if you see through the stories, I think you'll see it more at the end with love war stories. It's the way that culture is passed on to women, by women. So I think I've seen this in other Latinx cultures, but definitely growing up, you know, we got the sense that, you know, men were sucios and you should stay away from them, etc. But then you're also expected to be heterosexual. And it's a very weird proposition. Like, this is what you're supposed to want, but these men are terrible, but you're supposed to be in a relationship with them. And so, I mean, if you thought about it, you're like, well, I mean, I don't know how we're supposed to make heterosexuality work, because this is quite the paradox. And yeah, and so, but we see a lot of women perpetuating that, like a lot of mothers instilling that. And even like with my friends who are Dominican and were raised in a much more traditional way, you know, they'll talk about how their brothers didn't have to clean, or their brothers didn't have a curfew, meanwhile they did, etc. But who's enforcing that is the mother, you know? So, okay, that was a tangent.
No, that was great, and you're absolutely right. It's very nuanced, and the only person that gets really degraded in the whole situation is the woman. Mm-hmm. Not even necessarily the girl, and not even necessarily the elder, but the like younger woman, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. Not the mother. Not the, you know, do you see what I'm saying? Like it's a very specific type of person. right.
Yeah. And she's like controlled by other people. Like she's controlled by her mother, you know, until she's no longer controlled by her mother. that it, you know, cultural traditions, you know, it's supposed to be the safe space, but it's not.
Right.
for certain women. And so, you know, Noelia and Tia Lola, they're going to find their space outside of these cultural norms. That's the only place they're going to be able to exist like wholly.
Can I ask you, did your family read your work? Did they read this work?
Yeah, my mom read it. Oh, my sister read it. I just have my mom and my sister. I mean, I have a father, but it doesn't really count. Yeah, I mean, my mom doesn't always get the stories, and you know, I don't know if she finds them that interesting, honestly. My sister loves them though, so yeah.
I'm always curious to when, you know, especially when it's fiction. You're not necessarily talking about your life, but you are talking about people you know, the experiences that you've seen happen. And I'm just always curious to know how family members feel about that, because it's like, you know, maybe your mom saw it a different way. It's just not her, you know, cup of tea, but your sister's like right there with you, like, yes, oh my God, okay, I'm so glad you've seen that too. We're in this together, you know?
The story, The Light in the Sky, I don't think you've read that yet.
Not yet.
It's, you know, it's a trip that me and my mom took to Puerto Rico, and we went to La Palguera, where there's like a bioluminescent bay, and again, that's the story that has the most truth in it, though I had to like take a lot of stuff out and make new stuff. But she was acting crazy when you read the story. Like, my mom was like thinking that there was a UFO in the sky because she saw like a blinking light, and then there was a speedboat that passed by us, and then this was because we took this boat ride like at 10 o'clock at night, and then she thought that the speedboat that passed us was full of thieves that were gonna kill us. But what was interesting to me in that moment too is also like there's a reversal there. You know, she was raised in Puerto Rico, but she kept being like, it's dangerous here, blah blah blah. And I'm like, really? Because everywhere we go, people have their doors open. So I don't think it's that dangerous. You know, you just walk into somebody's house. And meanwhile, like at home, I'm normally like the paranoid one, like lock the door, you know, blah, blah. But there I was so like relaxed and like trusting. And I mean, yeah, so it was an interesting reversal going on there.
Does anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, I would like to ask a question based on the last story where we left off, which, forgive me if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, like he had the Chongo, how you say it. I was making me curious as to whether you consider yourself a spiritual person at all, or whether you're invested in sort of ancestral matters of ancestry and spiritual guides, because that story is just very much about that, the concept of wanting to place a love spell on someone to make them fall in love with you, and it traffics in all those different entities that are very popular in spirituality. So I was just curious if that was something that you are personally kind of invested in, or did you kind of have to like read into that or research?
No, I had to research it. I mean, I think any sort of heterosexual college girl's dream is to sort of like wield a love spell and get the boy that she wants. You know, like I remember going to like psychics, you know, and doing things like that. So yeah, so I mean, I just thought that would be something interesting to write about. And I mean, that's the way the story started, just about this idea of a girl going to, you know, Botanica to get a love spell. But then the story evolved into what she loses, like all the cultural things that she loses. And one of those things is that connection to Santeria. My mother's mother slash, well, my mother's adopted mother / grandmother was an espiritista. And so my mom would tell me like how scared she was by like the ceremonies that they would have in the house. But I'm all like, ooh, tell me more. So I mean, I do find it interesting. And I mean, I wear this bracelet all the time, even though just to go with my outfits. It has the colors of Chungo, red and white. But I feel like, I don't know. I feel like when I don't wear it, bad things happen. And so yeah, I mean, I'm interested in it. I'm not like deeply invested in it in terms of, you know, I haven't gone through like any initiations or anything like that. But I do love this idea that we have something that's ours. And yeah, and then it connects back to like our African roots. Yeah, so it's more like, you know, general interest.
Thank you. Thank you. Barbara, do you want to chime in? And thank you, Greg, for the question. Great question.
Muted.
Barbara?
Sorry. Hi, Ivelisse. Thank you so much for coming. I just wanted to thank Jasmine for pointing out a few lines that she found very interesting. And I also did want to point out a few and do like a two-part question for you. One is, and I am puzzle pieces scattered on the floor. It seemed very word gathering-ish type. I love that. And also there's one other one. I wonder if he has told her his prepackaged tragedy spilled early and often hastening you into love. I thought that was like so beautiful. It just kind of stopped the whole story for me just to focus on those couple of lines. Sorry, Jasmine, she corrected me in chat. Thank you so much. I guess my two-part question is your first language Spanish or English? And the second question is, because there's so much power in words and power in language, when you write your stories, do you think in Spanish or do you think in English?
We came here when I was 2. My father doesn't speak English. But I you know, my language of instruction has always been English. So I guess I would say English is my first language, even if I grew up hearing Spanish first. No, I usually think in English. Sometimes I can't capture something in English, and so I'll put it in Spanish because I feel like the Spanish word captures it better. But yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you. I feel like one comment, you know, when you speak another language, I feel the other language has so much more power and meaning when you say it in the other language. So that's why I thought about that. Thank you.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, I can tell if my mother's really mad when she talks in Spanish, you know.
Yasmin, did you want to ask another question?
Yes, I would love to. I just wanted to, it's a Belinda question and then to the Shango story line, but I just wanted to read the first piece from the Belindas and I'll get right into the question. So it's in the middle of my 3rd week working at Columbia's Law School Career Service office. When he finally comes in, I'm standing in front of the brown filing cabinet, the one that has a dent in the top right corner because a law student flipped out a few years ago and threw one of those heavy ass case law books at it. And I smell his cologne, Obsession. And when I turn around, there he is, David. So the reason I read that is that, like, one, I like the story a lot, but 2 is that after I finished, I was like, yo, she put everything in the story in the first paragraph. I was like, that's why I said the haiku, but I'm gonna leave it alone. But but the reason I was what after reading the book, after reading that short story, it maybe reminded me of another author's work, Danzy Senya. She wrote Caucasia, but I'm thinking of Symptomatic. And something about, as I was reading this particular piece, it made me remind me of that particular novel, because I could really see it like in a visual context, something about it, because there's this stalking going on, there's this obsession going on, and it's very like noir. Like, it's something about it that's very like, you don't really, I start to wonder like, how much is this narrator like reliable? You know what I mean? So I was wondering if you ever thought about making this particular story into something that would be available for folks to watch visually. And the second question I had, in regards to the Shango story, as you did your research, was there anything that you learned about the Orishas that took you back a bit? Was there anything like that made you, because sometimes, since it's been, due to all the 1,001 reasons of why, been somewhat secretive, I wonder if you were concerned about that, since that wasn't your primary space. So those are the two things I wanted to bring up.
Okay. The Belinda question was, what's the Belinda question?
I just wonder if you ever thought about having it, be like a filmmaking piece or something like that, since it has that visual component.
I mean, if somebody wanted to buy it, I would love that. I mean, Netflix wants to call me, I think that would be great. But I did want to say something about what you said about the whole story being in, that short paragraph. Like, when you're writing like on two levels. Like, I'm writing like on a conscious level, but then when I look back, I see how my subconscious is working. Because listening to you read it, I was like, oh, look at that. I was making the connections in my head. And so you're working on this subconscious level. And so one of the things that I do when I'm revising is I do like a literary analysis of my text to see what those connections are, what those symbols are. Like, so especially the things I'm not thinking about consciously. And I want to see what's coming through. And, I've talked to my students about this too, because I realize, I tell my students, take credit for everything in your text, even if you weren't consciously thinking it, because there's so much going on when you're writing, and you're really writing on two levels. Okay, so then...
Wait, I'm sorry. So sorry. Could you please, I've never heard anyone share literary analysis before. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's, I read it like I would read an English, a book in an English class, in the terms of like, I'm looking for this symbol and I'm like, okay, how's the symbol functioning? Okay, this idea connects to that idea over here. And so I'm following threads, and I'm also like interpreting the text, like if I didn't write it myself, but I'm interpreting the text to see what's coming out of it, to make sure that I am offering the message that I want to offer. But I do want to look at the way that the story is coming together behind the scenes. So, in the middle of writing the short stories, I would do an outline. And so I'm working like on a conscious level of like story making. But then when I do the literary analysis, I'm checking that. It's basically like checking my work, like if you're a math problem. And I want to see what's coming up unconsciously, just to make sure that everything is like copacetic.
That is so fascinatingly cool. Thank you for sharing that. That's really dope. It's really dope.
Then with the Chango, I did worry about that, just because I wanted to be respectful, and like I was worried that some of the things I said might be hokey. So I did cut. I'm always like whittling down language, you know, I'm thinking, will this line embarrass me one day? And if the answer is yes, I take it out, you know? And so yeah, so I did want to be conscientious about that. Yeah, one of the things that I learned, I had written a scene before I had done any research, and it was about women cutting off their breasts to like honor Chango. And then when I did my research, I felt like there was something about breasts and supplication with Chango, and I was like, synchronicity. Like I tapped into Chango's psyche, you know. And then I also was able to, in my mind too, when I was doing the research, I'm like, why would Chango give up divination for music? Like, I'm like, that seems like a bad choice, you know? But then like at the end of the story, I was able to come up with a hypothesis. So that was fun.
Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else want to chime in? Maybe someone who hasn't gotten a chance to say anything yet? You know, Ivelisse, we had a bit of a debate last week about one of your stories that perhaps you can settle. And it was about Some Springs Girls Do Die. Can you talk about, if I remember correctly, a few of us thought that, or a few book club members thought that the story was all in the main character's head, like it didn't really happen, it was just kind of all mental. Is that true, or like what? Can you walk us through this very short yet very packed story?
You know, no, it's happening. No, it's not happening in her head, even though there's not a lot of action on the page. So it's actually happening. So the narrator is having this one day with the guy she's seeing, and he's being terrible, etc. But at the same time, her friend is committing suicide. And so those are there are two perspectives in the story.
Okay, so it didn't have anything to do, because I'll tell you what I thought. I thought that she was committing suicide because her best friend had ran off with her boyfriend.
No.
Oh, okay.
No. You know, I think maybe the story is confusing, even though they let me publish it, because other people have expressed confusion about it. So I'm like, but then I read it and I'm like, it makes sense to me. So.
No, it makes sense now that you say that. I mean, I thought that I felt like there were two different stories really happening. I just thought they were somehow connected. But you're saying there's one girl, her boyfriend, and then her friend, but the two never collide.
Right, exactly. Except for a moment when the narrator sees the girl for a second, and it says like, her knowing what I was going back to must have let her hello drop to the ground, or something like that. And it's also about there are two different types of deaths here. So there's the suicide, and so you know, the one girl you know, has been poorly treated, and there are probably other reasons for the suicide, etc. But then the narrator, the main narrator, the one who's alive, stays alive, she's playing with death in a different way, in the sense that she's being subsumed by this guy, and you know, again, he's transgressing her boundaries, etc. So, and even when she finds out her friend is dead, you know, she wants to wrap her arms around this guy who's terrible. So in a way, that's her death.
Very cool. Very cool.
Can I go back to the summer of Nene? And I was wondering, did you write that story with the intention of it being a queer love story, or is it just young, young love? I mean, of course, there's certain elements that make it queer, but if you take out the physical sort of parts of it.
Well, yeah, no, I think it came out definitely queer because, at the end, Jimmy is like, his love for Nene is never going to fall apart like heterosexual models, like all the heterosexual models he's been privy to. And so this is also like another way to sort of look at love in this book is that it can remain pristine in a way, but that's only because it's sort of like not allowed. But it's also kind of optimistic because again, it's not going to fall apart. The memories that Jimmy's going to have are of this very like sweet and endearing like love story. It's not going to be like his mom and her boyfriend who like say like soap opera things, like who don't have their own words. He doesn't have the words either, but he's not like engaging in like rhetoric like his mom and the boyfriend. Instead he's left with like this very like sweet memory. So yeah.
Why do you think, I mean, you're the author, so you can dictate this, but why do you think it won't fall apart?
Oh, because because it's gonna come to an end, and so it's not gonna so when the school year starts, Nene's not gonna be around, etc. And basically it's and they can never be public, and so it never falls apart in the sense like the idea of it. They're gonna definitely drift apart, etc. They can't have a relationship, so they're like stuck in this moment where everything's sort of like sweet. Yeah.
We've got about 20 minutes left. Does anyone else want to chime in?
What inspired you to write?
Okay, it's a silly story, but so I think I was in 5th grade, and we all the whole school had to write a story, and really what I wrote was like a paragraph. But anyways, all I remember is that I used the word grotesque in it because I used to like look up words that I didn't know and then use them. And then the principal came to my homeroom and said I had the best story in the school. She gave me a chocolate bar, and that was it. And then I could buy all the chocolate I want. No, but I was always an avid reader. Yeah, I was always reading, so I think it was like the natural thing. But then I like spent a lot of time saying I wanted to write and I didn't write. But then I went to my MFA program and I learned how to write there. And then in my PhD program, I learned even more like how to actually write. And it's a challenging thing because sometimes you think, what's the point? I should give up, nothing's happening or whatever. It took a long time for this book to get published. I actually gave up on it and I said, nobody's gonna publish it. This was, I think, 2015 or 2016 or something. Yeah, I gave up on the book and I started working on a novel, and I said, well, most of the stories have been published, so I'll just let it go. But this was after like years of being depressed and blah, blah, blah. And then I saw that the feminist press had a contest for women and non-binary writers of color for their first book. And I said, well, I'll just send it in because it's just sitting there. And it was a finalist. It didn't win, but they wanted to publish it anyway. And they did. And then it ended up being a Faulkner finalist. So oh, there's you, Disney. So anyways, that's my little miracle story. So but it's easier to go on now just because I've gotten to validation and I got the first book published. So but it's a challenging thing. Like somebody asked me, like, why didn't you give up? And I said I tried to give up, but then I didn't know what to do with all that time. So then I just kind of kept going.
You mentioned workshopping with Juno Diaz and Christina Garcia. Can you speak about that process of, I know other writers and they always seem to be workshopping their work, particularly with short stories. And I know that's just part of what you have to do, but can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I took workshops in my MFA program and then my PhD program. My PhD is in English and creative writing. And I know there's a lot of like bias against MFA programs, but I thought they were really helpful. I thought it was really helpful because, like I said, I learned how to write. I think I had like a voice, but I didn't know how to put a story together. And, you know, I was teaching a class this summer for Tin House, and, you know, one student was all excited because she had a concept. And I was all like, well, where's the plot? I kept saying, I think I had 8 students, 7 out of 8. I'm like, where's your plot? And so, you know, you could have great ideas, you could have beautiful language, but you have to know how to put a story together and how to sort of write an engaging story with plot. And so, you know, I think, you know, for all those workshops, it's about, you know, getting your craft, your craft seen in like different spaces. So, you know, most of the workshops I did in my MFA and PhD program, I might have been the only person of color. And so, you know, being able to take a class with Juno and Christina, and I took a class with Elena Maria Villamontes, you know, you get to have a professor who is of color and will sort of appreciate your work on a different level. And you also get to be in these communal spaces. Like I went to VONA, and that's where I took my second workshop with Juno. And VONA is for like writers of color. They've had some issues as of late, but when we went, it was wonderful because it was all writers of color, and it was such a like homey space. And yeah, so I mean, if you're a writer, I would encourage you to go to these things, because one, I was also very strategic about who I took workshops with. One, I'm going to take a workshop with somebody whose work I love. And then I am also thinking ahead, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I can ask this person for a blurb in the future. And so that was helpful. And then you also get to learn like just different things from different people. And I would also say, like, besides like taking a class with like, you know, a writer you admire, like if you go to a workshop, you should also like become chummy with your peers. Your peers are going to be the ones like coming up with you. They're going to share your pain. They're going to share their successes. And one day they might be doing something and they'll like totally help you out and blah, blah, blah. And I think it's just great to have like a literary community because, I mean, you know, my mom doesn't want to hear about my writing, you know, like, so you want to talk to other writers and you can bitch about, you know, the thing, and they'll care and they'll understand. So, somebody had a question about my novel. I had started a different novel, but this summer I went to Puerto Rico and I felt like the ancestors were calling me. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go back to my original novel idea, though it's changed. So I'll tell you what my novel is about at this moment. Right now it's called Before We Become a New People, which I think is too clunky. I think I might change it to Gritos, but I'm not sure yet. So basically, the story opens in 1898 when the Americans invade Puerto Rico, and we first meet Loida, who's a formerly enslaved woman in Puerto Rico, and she kind of wants to see the destructions that are going to befall Puerto Rico now that the Americans have invaded, because she doesn't feel like there's a sense of community. She doesn't feel like a sense of nationhood in that particular space. And as we go on in the novel, she's like a domestic worker for this Spanish couple, and they get murdered by the Tiznados. And the Tiznados in 1898 were basically, they were mostly in the countryside. They were rebels who would, I think it was black in their faces, were charcoal, but they were like robbing the hacienda owners, and like they were like looting the hacienda stores, and then they were burning like the debt rolls so that, you know, the poor worker who was up to his eyeballs in debt to the hacienda owner, you know, that was erased because they were burning the rolls. And so so Loida's patrons are murdered by the Tiznados, and this infuriates Loida because this is the only amount of stability she's had. So she was taken from Yoruba land and transported to Puerto Rico to become enslaved. And so then she works with the Americans to spy on Mama Malin, who's a brothel owner, who's, I was inspired by Isabel La Negra, who's a famous brothel owner in Ponce. And so Mama Malin is like the head of like this cell of Tiznados, and Loida's spying on Mama Malin, and she's feeding information to the Americans. And the Americans are essentially going to enact a massacre at a bomba dance. And then Loida's going to rethink her alliances. And so it's about nationhood, and it's about how we build community. I'm super interested in like, I'm reading a lot of like history books and like scholarly work. And it's so fascinating because, you know, we have this definition of Puerto Ricans now, which is like, you know, we're Indian, African, and Spanish. But in that moment in time in 1898, like, you don't see that. You see that there are Spanish people that are like separate, you know, they're Spanish. Then there are Creole people who are, you know, descendants of Europeans who were born in Puerto Rico. And so you really see like a separated, like a fragmented society, which is not how we think of Puerto Ricans now, which I find completely fascinating. So, you know, my query here is, how do we become a people? Like, how does that happen? And so, oh, and sorry, one more thing. And Loida, she is, by working for the Americans, she's also trying to find her sister, Yejide, who was also taken from Yoruba land. And the Americans are trying to find your sister. That's what she's supposed to get out of spying from them.
Does it make you nervous talking about the work that you're working on in front of the public?
No, because I'm sure it'll change. And I was also working on a different novel before, but it's also like when I wrote my short stories, like I would start with like a kernel of an idea. Like with like Heather Chango, I just thought, okay, a girl wants to go to Botanica. And basically I would write. And I would try to then see, yes, I would try to see like what story is coming out. And then that's why I would outline in the process, blah, blah. But this time around, I was like, I'm not spending 20 years writing this book. So I wrote an outline before I started writing. And there, I mean, there's still magic happening. And the next draft might be completely different. Not completely, but a lot different. So.
In this collection, what is I'm sure you probably have written stories over the years that kind of make it into this collection. And what's the oldest story and what's the most current?
Yeah, the oldest story is Love War Stories. I started it in like fall '96 to try to apply to my MFA programs. And again, it wasn't really a story then, but I think it had like a distinct voice. So I'm thinking that's where I got in to Emerson. And then the newest story is the Belindas. And so that's where I feel like I have the most like skill in terms of craft. Like, by the time I get to the Belindas, I'm a much better writer than I was at the beginning. So, but the Belindas is still a lot of work, but yeah.
When you consider an older story, is that a concern that your writing skill has changed to the point where it may, the stories together may not fit well as far as the presentation of your writing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also I was like, I'm not the same person that started these stories that's going to end them. But I think ultimately that was helpful in a way, because I don't think I could have written this same book with like the sort of like thoughtfulness to like language, or like the thoughtfulness to like human experience when I was younger. I think I needed to experience life and like ruminate on these things in order to, just think critically and differently, and just very thoughtfully about things that I wouldn't have been able to see when I was like 20. So, and I mean, ultimately, what happened at the end is like, after you submit your book, blah blah, you revise it. Then I had to like submit it in August, and then basically the week before, I like just kind of went nuts, and I like changed 3 stories. I changed like had a chango. I changed the light in the sky, and then there was something else that like I didn't feel was right. So yeah, so I think I was able to get it up more to speed. Yeah.
Got about 5 minutes left. Does anyone else want to pop to the stage? Maybe someone that hasn't said anything yet.
Thank you, BB.
I do have another, if no one has a question, I don't want to take up everybody's time, but
oh yeah, go ahead, Ron.
So on the one hand, you're a student, so you're taking writing workshops, but on the other hand, you are a teacher. You are, you have students. What's the overlap there between you as a student and you as an educator?
Yeah, I mostly taught like composition, so there was that overlap. And I mean, I did actually teach creative writing at I taught at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, and then at BMCC, and I did teach creative writing there. Yeah, there is definitely overlap, but there's still overlap now, because I was like, I love to nap, and I'm a tired old lady, and I was like, I need to write this novel though, So I'm taking a class called like How to Write Your Novel in a Year. And so it's every Monday, and we have to submit like every 3 weeks, and it's like, oh, but you know, I'm a good student because I fall back and I don't try to like take over the class, even though I'm like, she doesn't end on time, she doesn't follow the schedule, you know, because those are things that I do. And but I definitely act the student, so I just fall back and you know, take my place. And but I like learning. I like being at school. I think it's fun, and I'm willing to learn. You know, like I don't think I know everything, and you know, somebody can say one thing like this gem, you know, this nugget that like, you know, I remember like 10 years later. And so I'm always open to opportunities like that. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm always trying to learn. So